Thanks for joining us at the Business Growth Cafe, where each week we select from a menu of topics for a focused discussion with an industry expert to provide insights that can impact your business's growth. With your host, Angelo Ponzi.
I am Angelo Ponzi, your host here at the Business Growth Cafe, and thank you for joining us. Now, I want to show of hands, how many of you listeners want to write a book? Come on now. Show of hands, how many of you has started one book but never finished it? How about 2 books? How about a book that you started 10 years ago? And unfortunately, I fall into that category. And frankly, I've raised my hands on every question I just asked. Ladies and gentlemen, I am that author who just can't seem to find time to get the words down on paper. Not to say I haven't written. I've written articles and blogs and ebooks and workbooks, that elusive novel, self-help book, marketing book, because that's who I am, or that mystery, actually the one I started over 10 years ago, is still sitting in the digital files on my computer. But today on the show, I have Laura Gale, a ghostwriter, and this isn't a scary thing, but a ghostwriter who is here to help all of us and help you closet authors or procrastinators, unfortunately I fall into both of those categories, kickstart that book sitting in the drawer. So stay tuned. Here's one thing I'm happy to write about, a strategic plan. Your strategic plans are essential to managing your business's growth. Spend the time to develop a cohesive roadmap to follow to ensure your entire team is moving in the right direction. These plans should take the insights and the brand strategy work you've already completed to help you achieve your long-term business and growth objectives, as well as keep you competitive. These are actionable plans and should include the details of achieving your growth, including tactical implementations, timelines, budgets, and KPIs for success. Developing your plan is a team sport. Make sure you include the stakeholders from each of your strategic departments in your organization, because everybody in the company is impacted by the success or failure of your plans. The following are 6 key questions to ask yourself. Do you have a clear understanding about what you're trying to achieve? Number 2, what does your brand stand for in the eyes of your customers? 3, why do your customers buy from you? 4, what are your competitors doing? And 5, what is your approach to sales? Where are your opportunities for revenue coming from? And number 6, how can you differentiate yourself from your competition? Visit theponzigroup.com to learn more. I have Laura Gale, a ghostwriter, here to help us figure out a way to get that book out of our head and onto paper. Laura, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Angelo.
Yeah, I'm excited. I am actually really excited because I am I'm going to say a closet author because I write all the time. I write articles, I write blogs, I do videos, I publish ebooks, workbooks, but the elusive, I'm not saying novel, but self-help, whatever it happens to be, I just haven't got there yet. I have a marketing book over to my right and probably about 100 and some odd pages in, but I haven't touched it in 6 months. I have a novel, a mystery that I started, 12 years ago, got through about 6 chapters and it still sits there. And I did revisit it about 6 months ago because I got excited one day and all I did was re-edit what I'd already written and stopped and never got back to it. And then I have another kind of, I'll call it a business book, but it's based on, the lessons my father taught me. And same thing, I'm like 6, 7 chapters in. I actually have the whole thing outlined, but it's just finding the time to sit down and do it. And I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges for someone like myself and why they reach out to someone like you.
Yeah, I mean, for a lot of people running their own businesses, there's this dream to write a book. And, I'm obviously a huge proponent of that process, but it does take time and energy. And if you're running lots of other projects, it can be hard to find that space. One thing that I've been doing myself recently, obviously, I have a lot of client work going on and everything, but I do want to publish my own work as well. And so I've been just spending half an hour every day writing by hand. And that has been actually a really kind of good separation from the client process, because it feels like a different process and it's only half an hour. I can squeeze it in here or there, even if it's over lunch or something. And so that has been one way of kind of getting around that block.
Do you for yourself, and this is one of the things that I've been thinking about doing, block out a very specific time of day that you focus on your own work? Or is it just kind of when you find the time?
I don't. I have a little rebellious streak that is really only rebellious with myself, but I don't do well sticking to strict schedules. And so I do the first thing that feels easy for the day, and then I do the next thing that feels easy. And, I just sort of roll from one thing to the next. So sometimes it will be my own stuff first thing in the morning, but it tends to be client work. Sort of the first half of the day, and then by the time I hit mid-afternoon, then I sort of think, okay, I've gotten all of the things that I have to get done off my plate, and then I can kind of spend a bit more time in that slightly more creative space.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to feel too bad then if you're struggling to write your own books. but you have published. I don't want. It's one of my questions for later on, but I'm going to ask it now. So you have written books for yourself?
I have. Yes.
And how many, and what are they about? And I know because I have notes, but I want you to tell the audience.
Well, I've published 2 so far. I'm working on my 3rd at the moment, and I have an agent who's cracking the whip over my shoulder for that one. So that's a little bit of extra motivation. The first 2 were specifically about business. The first one was on content marketing, and that one was called Content That Converts. And that was all about how to build a replicable content marketing system for B2B companies. I just felt like for years there was just nothing out there about this topic, and everybody was talking about how powerful content marketing was, and no one was talking about how to do it. So that book came out in 2016, I believe. And then the second one was called How to Write This Book, and that's basically a distillation of my whole process for working with clients to create their books. So everything that I do when I take on a new ghostwriting client from start to finish is in that book, and it's very much designed to help people kind of understand what they don't know yet about that process, so that they can kind of get past all of those mental blocks that do stop people from writing. Because I think often the problem is not knowing what comes next. What do I need to do? Especially if I get stuck, what happens if I get stuck, and how can I kind of get around that and keep going? And so that book is very directed at solving those problems.
Well, it's interesting. And by the way, you just sold a copy, because as soon as we're done, I'm going to go buy one. But when I started to write my mystery, my oldest boy is a writer, and he's written a book, and he's in the process of writing another book. But that's how he makes his living. But so he said, "Oh, you've got to do this, you've got to do that." And so I must have like 9 books that I was trying to juggle and figure out the best process. And I think I might have confused myself more than maybe just getting it down on paper. And because that's how I write when I write articles, I just get it down. Then I go back and I re-edit and fine tune. But for some reason with the book, I get stuck or I get lost in the process.
I think there's a lot of head trash that comes out with books, because we sort of really value books in our culture. We really sort of hold authors up on a pedestal. And it's funny because, even now with self-publishing, that process is so much more accessible, but there's still something there in kind of your self-perception that has to tweak a little bit to say, this is something worth talking about. It's a story worth telling, and I've got to, sit down and prioritize my own interest here, and that's not something that we're necessarily very good at.
Right. When you talk to someone who wants to do a book, I think part of it would have to be, I'm going to say, besides the procrastination and other things that drive, someone to pick up the phone to call you. But how much do you have to be a therapist to deal with someone who maybe is self-doubting that what they have to say is worth saying?
It happens on most projects that there's a conversation about, is this really valuable? Am I just stroking my own ego? Is there a space in the market for this? People, I think, get partway into a project. It's usually about a third of the way through, and they start to think, what if it's not what I hoped it was going to be? What if it's not? What if nobody likes it, basically? And that conversation is always about why you have something valuable to say. And I really believe that each of us, especially in the business world, have really valuable lessons to share and really important insights to share. And I think, my kind of mission is always to get those lessons out in the world, because it can really facilitate a lot of other people to kind of create the lives that they want if they have access to all of these hard-won lessons from people who have gone before them. And so I really think, even if there are other books in your genre or on this topic, nobody has had your particular experiences. Nobody has come from your background. People don't have your same perspective. And so there will be readers for what you have to say, and you will say it in a way that resonates with people who maybe have never been able to kind of get what other books have been talking about.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and that's a great point, because, when I talk to other marketing people and when I meet them, so I mentioned earlier, I belong to these kind of networking groups, and I sit in these meetings, and there might be 30 people in the room, and there's 7 marketers. And so it's like, how do I differentiate myself? What do I do? And then when I talk to them, I realize that we have very, very different backgrounds, even though we both have the, in quotes, marketing title. And so that perspective, and I think that's what I was trying to bring to my, quote unquote, marketing book. And I think where I got lost in the process and as I started getting beyond. So I like to look at the business in a holistic view from standpoint and address that. But I started getting the areas that I know they're important. I know how to talk about them, but I don't actually know how to do them. I'm not an accountant. And so when I started getting into the finance world, I started getting really lost. And then I thought, okay, who's going to read, the marketing guy's book on finance? But there is a finance component. So, so really interesting. So I have all these questions, but you keep saying things, and I just want to go down the path. So one of the things about people start to write a book, and now there's that part about getting it published, and I'm kind of skipping the whole process, and we're going to come back to that. But you said agent, and you said self-publishing, and I think that's what a lot of people struggle with. I know that a friend of mine has written several books. He's always self-published. This last time around, he went through one of the named publishers, and he actually didn't maybe get the traction he had hoped. And he did a better job when he was just self-publishing. What's your thoughts on that?
I think there is always room for both models. I come out of the traditional publishing world. I worked as a publicist for several years in one of the big 5 publishing houses. And so I am pretty familiar with that process. And I think for a lot of people, self-publishing is just an amazing platform. It gives you so much control over the process. You really get to make the project what you want it to be, and you don't really have to adjust it at all for anybody else's considerations. And if you're writing it about your business, that's really, really valuable. The lead times in traditional publishing are very long, and you really can't make use of the book in the interim, going from when you finished writing to when it's actually available for sale. Often there's 18 months, 2 years before you're really able to make use of it. And so if you're writing it to grow your business, that's just dead time. So self-publishing really takes care of that. I have self-published my first 2 books, and most of my clients have self-published. A couple of people have been offered book deals after completing the projects, and they've gone ahead with those just because it kind of opens up a new range of opportunities. But it does mean that you sort of have to be willing to compromise on title and cover design and the publication timeline. And I think what people don't understand about traditional publishing is that most big publishers are putting out dozens, if not hundreds, of books every month. So most publishers are split into imprints. So you might have 5 or 10 different brands, quote unquote brands under the publisher title. And then each of those different brands, or imprints as they're known, publish a different genre of book or different type of book. And each of those imprints is probably publishing 30 to 50 books a month. So your book is one of many on a list for that month. This is a constant churn. And so you are going to have to do a lot of marketing, a lot of publicity on your own steam. There might be a little bit of budget to help you with that, but unless you're really, really sort of a brand name and you've got good name recognition, probably the amount of resources available to you through a traditional publisher are not going to be huge. So even though this book that I'm working on at the moment, I want to go through that traditional process so that I understand what that's like, and I can advise people better on it. And I also have a sort of different goal for this book to what I've had for the previous two. But even though I'm going in with an agent, with all of this track record, I've sold thousands and thousands of copies of my previous two books. So I'm in a strong position with a publisher, but it's still not going to be enough to get me, their kind of marquee treatment. So I will go in with a publicity team behind me. I'll have a plan, but it's going to be on my own steam. And so I think people just really need to understand, no matter which option you choose, you really are going to have to lead the marketing yourself. And it really just comes down to then what's your goal for the book. Is basically choosing between self-publishing and traditional publishing, I think really comes down to what your goal for the book is. And if the goal is to get your brand out there and to sort of reach a very wide audience, a very broad audience, then going with a traditional publisher can be great. If you are wanting it to be very targeted in who you get in front of and who your readers are, you want to put it to use in your business straight away, then I think usually self-publishing is the better option.
So I want to backtrack just a little bit because I got so excited we kind of jumped right into it. But I actually want to take a couple minutes and let you tell the audience about who you are in your business.
So I grew up in Australia. I did a writing and publishing degree and then went straight into working at this publishing house. I worked there for several years and had some really amazing experiences there, working on Nelson Mandela's book and Tina Fey's book, and some work with J.K. Rowling when she sort of moved into adult fiction. And so I had a real in the deep end experience in the book industry there, and that was amazing. But about 2011, when Amazon was really starting to pick up speed, the book industry just seemed to be really struggling. A lot of people were getting laid off, and so I thought I need to sort of figure out how to do this on my own, basically, how I can sort of future-proof my work a little bit. And so I sort of quit the publishing house before I got laid off, and then went into basically doing content marketing, helping people write copy and all kinds of material for all kinds of different niches. And eventually a client said to me, I know that you've been doing all of this content marketing stuff, and that's great, but didn't you work in publishing for a while? Couldn't you do books? And I sort of said, well, I guess, probably. And he said, well, I want to write a book, so can you help me write a book and we'll just figure it out together? And I was like, okay. So, that was very serendipitous and a pretty generous bet for him to make, but it definitely led me to ghostwriting, and now that's the bulk of what I do. I do usually 3 projects a year with clients to sort of write books about their businesses and how they have come to be, and yeah, it keeps me very busy.
What's a kind of a time frame? Is obviously you can't write 3 books all at the same time. So what's a typical commitment to get a book written? 60 days, 90 days, 120 days? I
ideally would have about 6 months with a project, but most of the time it usually ends up being 4.5 or 5.
And I would imagine a lot of it also has to be, and I even tell clients this, they said, can you move this project along? I said, yes, but if you're available, don't put pressure on me and then you disappear and then still expect me to meet the deadline. So I would imagine it's a give and take in working with someone in a ghostwriting situation.
Yeah, I try to be pretty clear with clients about when I'm going to be able to give them the best experience. I don't want to double up at particular stages of a project. If we're at if I'm in stage 3 of one project, I can certainly start on stage 1 with a different project. But if we're on stage 2, where I'm sort of thinking about drafting and I'm really immersed in the material, I don't want to be doing that on 2 books. So I really do try to spread out the workflow. Basically, I ended up sort of building a waiting list. So when clients want to work with me, they just put down a deposit and take the next available slot, basically, because it just means that they know when it's coming, they know what the timeline is, they can get a lot of material ready in advance. So if they want to go faster, then they have everything that we would need to do that. But it's, there's only so much output I can physically manage. And so I do have to be a little bit careful about how I plan those projects.
Okay. What do you think the biggest misunderstanding is by someone who wants to engage with you or a ghostwriter?
I think there's a lot of anxiety about using a ghostwriter, that it's not going to sound like you, or that the work isn't really yours, or that you're sort of cheating by using somebody else. I really disagree with that. Obviously, I think, you hire other experts in your business all the time to help you. You get somebody to help you with your taxes, you get a designer to help you with your website design. You're hiring people all the time, and I really think it's the same with writing. The job of a ghostwriter is to take your words, your message, your brand, and just capture that on the page. They shouldn't really be at all in the story. When your reader is going through the book, they should think, wow, I can really hear Angelo on the page here. I can hear his voice in my head as I'm reading. That's my ultimate goal for every book, is that it sounds exactly like the client and that nobody would ever know the difference. So that's, I think, the biggest anxiety that people have. And it's really one of the things that I spend a lot of time making sure that we get right.
Well, it's interesting you say that. I mean, I know so one of the books that I had started, I think I mentioned my son is a writer, so I engaged with him, and so he was generating some of the content, and I always struggled with the idea that it wasn't me writing it, and certainly he knows me, so he captured my voice, but mentally, I had this thing in the back of my head that it really wasn't me, and parts of that was maybe ego and things like that. So I think I can imagine a lot of people struggle with that. It's like, I want to get it done. I don't have the time. And if I engage with somebody, then to your point, cheating, to get the book out. And I could definitely see and experience how people could wrestle with that.
I think, though, that you've gone through all of this experience. You have earned all of these stories, and I'm not injecting anything that you haven't told me. The first part of the ghostwriting process is to spend quite a lot of time just talking through all of the material that you want to cover. So together we would lay out what the strategic purpose of the book is, and then we would go into building an outline so we have a plan to work from. Then we just do a lot of interviews based on that outline. And so I record all of those conversations. And so as much as possible, that material is verbatim what the client has said. So, it is them. It's just in a different format. It's, if they were presenting it, it's sort of like they're almost reading the audiobook before it's been edited. They're just telling me the information and I'm just capturing it. So it is very much them. They're just not the ones putting it, typing it onto the page.
Sure. Well, it's interesting you said, kind of recording an audio and having a conversation. So actually one of my books, I think I mentioned, is kind of like life lessons from my father. And I was back east for a family reunion, and I was sitting at a friend's house that I hadn't seen, and I was waiting to get taken to the family reunion. And all of a sudden I just started thinking about my dad, who had passed about 12 years earlier. And he was a plumber. And so I started working with him when I was like 12 years old. And so I started thinking of stories. So I literally picked up my phone and I started recording my thoughts, which I later turned into a podcast. And so people heard the podcast and they said, oh, you should write a book. This is really interesting and funny. And so that was the inspiration to take it further and to, recapture those stories. And, a lot of times what we think is funny isn't necessarily other people think is funny. So, but that was the foundation for that. And I like that idea of talking it out and working from there, because again, it's a stream of consciousness. I mean, I give a 1-hour webinar on marketing, which I actually recorded one not too long ago, and I turned it into a podcast because, it was really educational, and instead of me going back and trying to recreate it, it just took some editing to get it out there. And to your point, I could turn that into some kind of, ebook or something if I wanted to.
Yeah.
What are some of the other steps? And is there typically, you started talking about, meeting with the client, getting the content, getting the idea of the direction and the stages. So is there kind of a building block approach that you take? And I'm really for pure understanding and how this process works?
Yeah, I think building blocks is a pretty good analogy. I really want to start every project with a very clear understanding of what the client wants the book to do in their business. Is it for leads? Is it for brand recognition? Is it, there's all sorts of goals that you might have. But if I can understand that upfront and understand how it's going to fit into the existing marketing ecosystem of your business, then that's going to give me a lot of clarity about how we work through the process. Something that we talk about very early on is the marketing. I think, people often delay beginning the marketing until very late in the process. And I really want people to start very early in the process. It takes time to build momentum about something. And, if you've got 4 or 6 months of promotional lead time before the book is available, I want that to be used. So that's kind of the early conversations about how that's going to happen. And then we go into, as I said, building an outline. Then we go into interviews. Once the interviews are done, I sort of take all of that material, go off into my little writer cave and turn all of that into a draft. So it's, something that's cohesive and has a narrative structure, and it's easy to consume. And then once that's complete, then I come back to the client and say, okay, let's go through some editing, show me where things need to be tightened up, where things are missing, if there's anybody that we can interview to add sort of depth to this. And then once the editing is complete, then we can go into getting it ready for publication and then get it ready to launch.
Okay. So I'm looking at my bookshelf, and I've got skinny books. I got thick books. I've got, things that are like 500 pages and stuff that's 100 pages. What is kind of some rules of thumb that if you want to, have a book and leverage it, and that's going to be my next question, how people leverage it, but leverage it for public speaking or building, thought leadership. But is there kind of a minimum, the book needs to be minimum of 100 pages or 115 pages? Is there any kind of guidelines and the kind of word counts that people need to think about?
It depends a lot, obviously, but I usually would aim for about 200 pages, which is, usually in the range of 40 to 45,000 words. That amount of content indicates to people that you are an expert, you know what you're talking about, but it's still accessible. Once you sort of start going past the 300-page mark, people start to feel a bit daunted. It's a lot to read, and 200 pages, if you're focused, you can get through that in a weekend, and that's, it's pretty easy to consume. And so I think that's kind of the sweet spot where people can see just how much experience you have, really come to think of you as an expert on this subject matter. But it's not so big that they think, oh, that makes me feel tired.
Yeah. So as my podcast is built, I get authors all the time, and they'll send me their books, and some of them are like, oh my God, this thing's like 350 pages. I can't read.
Right.
I don't have time to read this book, to digest it. And so it's always interesting on kind of the what's in the book, the content. And a lot of times I do read, and sometimes I feel like it's just a lot of filler stuff, and it's that just to make it bigger versus, just sticking to what, the real message is and the content.
Yeah, I'm not about that. That makes me crazy. I'd much rather read a 200-page book that's very lean and to the point, and, it's all fresh material. It's not being repeated over and over in different ways. Repetitive books like that, I would just put down and sort of throw across the room half the time. So I try not to write those books.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. I was doing some work on some website copy for a client the other day, and they asked me to go through their existing websites and, boil it down. And when I gave them the copy, it was, I think it was like a little less than 5 typewritten pages. And they said, well, there was a lot of content on the website. How did you boil it all down? I said, honestly, 60% of it was just constantly being repeated on every page, and to the point where, and it was long, and frankly, it turned me off. Except that was the job, so I had to read it. But I mean, if I read it on one page, I read it on the other page, and that's certainly not going to get you where you need to go.
Yeah, I think you just have to have respect for your audience. They're not dumb. They're going to see that it's repeated. And I think, you have to expect that people are going to want a high standard from you. So I think you got to deliver that.
What do you find when people come to you as kind of their motivation? Just, I want to be an author? Or is it really about leveraging it for business and thought leadership and doing presentations? What do you find?
I think people kind of fall into two camps. There's one who are very, very clear about what the purpose of the book is. It's purely for the growth of their business. It's very strategic. They've got a very specific use case for it. They know exactly how they're going to promote it. They come very ready, and it's kind of it's another marketing tool to execute. And those books tend to be much more how to do something. They're very focused on process. They're very, you could give it to somebody and that reader could go ahead and reproduce the result. On the other hand, there are people who are much more interested in their legacy, and they're wanting to, be an author and, have their work recognized for sure. But they're much more interested in sort of documenting how they did what they did, what they've prioritized, and sort of showing, what they've achieved. And I think, that's also a very powerful way for people to learn. It's just much more story driven. It's much more personality driven. There's a lot more kind of anecdote and that kind of thing in those types of books.
And I'm not sure if you can talk about all this, but can you tell me a story about one of your clients and, kind of how you participated in the process? And, are you 100% writing, or is it usually a combination? Or
it's been a mix. I'd probably prefer if I do all the writing, because then I don't have to go and sort of merge two different styles and two different, sets of material. But that has definitely happened, and it's fine when it does. It just takes a little bit longer. But I've had an incredibly diverse range of clients. I've had a guy who built a huge design agency after getting sober and having his life sort of burned down and all of his businesses burned down. And now he's, absolutely thriving. So that was a really interesting sort of redemption story. I recently finished a book with a woman who migrated to the US from Haiti when she was a child and sort of grew up in a very that immigrant family kind of environment where you're always working, always on the lookout for the next big opportunity. And, she has really just made an incredible life for herself. And she's just the most vivacious, high energy person. She's a writer as well. So she has a lot of confidence about how the stories can be delivered and everything. And so that was very collaborative and really fun. There's been a massive range, and I think, everybody has an interesting story. It's just a question of finding the way to tell it so that the reader is hooked from the outset and really takes something powerful away from it.
We talked about publishing and marketing, but is your involvement kind of a soup to nuts approach, or once the book is written and, kind of like, here you go, Angelo, good luck?
I'm not going to leave you adrift, but I will help you get to the point of publication, getting it listed for sale. And then all of the actual launch and all of the marketing, that's where I step out.
So I have to ask, of course, when we start thinking about publishing and self-publishing, I listen to people talk, I published my book on Amazon. Hey, I published my ebook on Amazon. It's that seems to be a huge venue to launch a lot of self-publishing authors. Mm-hmm. Are there others?
There are many others. One platform that it's quite a high standard. This platform, you've got to really get everything exactly right. But it's called Ingram Spark. They list the book on every online sales platform. Many in-store, like at physical stores, will pick up books that have been listed with Ingram Spark. They list it in libraries. They give it to wholesalers. So if you're wanting to sort of go beyond the Amazon sandpit, then I would really recommend Ingram yeah, as I say, they're demanding, and you've got to be diligent about getting all your files right and everything, and give yourself a little bit of time to list with them. But I think it's worth it for the breadth of coverage that you get.
Now, part of it is the ability to write. I think hope my listeners don't start sending me negative emails, but not everybody can write.
It's very true.
And so, part of that writing skill, and I think that kind of takes it out of it when they hire someone like yourself. But do you work with the authors to, if they're writing versus just interviewing, to kind of structure, or you just don't care how you get the content?
I think there are two types of writing. So there's what I would call organic creativity, and then there's industrial creativity. So organic creativity is more what you're doing when you're just journaling, or you're writing just to amuse yourself or to pass the time, or you just had an idea and you just want to scribble it down. That's very, it's very organic. It just comes out of nowhere and you put it down and you keep going. Industrial creativity is more like what we do, which is delivering material that we've sort of dreamt up, thought about, and then put onto the page. It's very process driven. We do it on deadlines. There's a real difference, I think, between how those two types of writing happen. Everybody can do organic creativity, and I think should. It's a really important part, I think, of having a healthy lifestyle. But the industrial stuff takes a lot of practice. And so I don't think there's any shame in it if you don't feel like you're good at that, because it is a skill set. I went to university for this. I have been writing my whole life. I've worked in the publishing industry the vast majority of my career. So, I have a lot of experience doing this. It's not any judgment on anybody if they don't feel like they're good at this. I think a lot of the people I have worked with have experienced benefit from observing my process. It helps give them a way to organize their thoughts, kind of capture those more creative moments in a way that sort of feels complete and allows them to actually go off and use those ideas. A lot of people will have new ideas for their business during this process, because it sort of opens up all of these conversations that you might not have had before. So yeah, I think there is a lot of benefit to be had in your own skills from working with somebody else. But I don't think it's a problem if you don't feel like you're there yet.
Okay. In what you just talked about, is that in the book that you described earlier on, the how to write the book?
Not really. This is sort of something I've been thinking about more recently. Have many thoughts on writing and creativity, but yeah, it's something that has kind of crystallized in my mind recently, that there are these sort of two avenues, and that it's not always the same mode of work.
You're going to have to hire a ghostwriter?
I hope that I'll be able to do it myself.
So I want to go back. You mentioned back when your publishing days, you worked on, I think you said Tina Fey and Nelson Mandela, but I also saw in your notes you worked on some Twilight stuff and J.K. Rowling's and Harry Potter stuff. So did you work kind of directly with the authors, or were you just taking their manuscripts and doing editing? How did that work? I'm just curious on that side of the business. You see it in movies, but I'm always curious.
So I was a publicist, so I was the very end of the process. Books go through this very long journey with publishers, and publicists come right at the end when the book has actually been released for sale. So the job there is to line up interviews and book reviews, organize tours and go to book festivals, all of the stuff that puts the book in front of readers. So it's very much sort of a collaborative process, often between you and the author, or it might be you and the author's assistant, or you and the author's assistant's assistant, depending on how big an author they are. So a lot of people I did work with very closely. Other people I maybe saw from a distance and sort of waved and thanks for coming. But yeah, there's a huge variety in the exposure that you get to authors there. But it was a really fun role, because it's kind of taking that author when they're at their most tired, their lowest ebb in that process, because like publishing can be really rough, especially the editing process. If you've kind of come to a point where you're happy with the book and you take it off to the publisher, then they're going to have their own whole process of editing that book, which can be really long and really painful. And so often by the time the book is completed and it's ready for sale, the author is tired and a bit demoralized and why did I do this again? So, my job was kind of to pep them up and get them out in the world and reassure them that this has all been worth it. And I think that was what was really gratifying about that role, was that you could make it concrete how valuable this process had been, because suddenly there were real live people who had read their book coming up and saying, oh my gosh, I love this, and being really excited. And I think that's just a really valuable part of writing a book, is seeing how much impact you can actually have on real people.
Do you do that as part of your service now?
No, that's where I sort of step back. So it's definitely something that I advise on. I'll give plenty of ideas, but I don't do the implementation myself.
Okay. I appreciate that. I understand that. That's kind of how I feel sometimes when I get into the tactical things in marketing, and it's like, I can tell you how to do it. I can tell you the process and the strategy, but if you're looking for me to implement it, I'm not your guy. Yeah. Now, you also have a podcast.
I do.
Why don't you talk about that?
So that is called The Business of Writing, and I run that with my friend Rachel, who is a copywriter, Rachel Mazza. And we started that podcast basically as a way to highlight how healthy a career writing can be, because there's kind of this trope about writers that you're sort of starving artists sequestered away in some aunt's attic, because you can't pay for bread, and it's just not true, right? Like, there's, if you're trying to make a living by writing a novel every 4 or 5 years, then it's quite possible that's going to be a hard life. But there are so many ways to make writing pay. And, it's sort of what I was going back to before, is this difference between organic and industrial creativity. And this industrial creativity is where the money is. And so, I think showing people all of the different variations of how that can work. There's copywriting, there's journalism, there's ghostwriting, there's novels, there's technical writing. There's so many different things that you can do. And there's just a flood of work, honestly. Like, I go on Twitter and follow a few writers who sort of collate the jobs that are going, and it's just a wild amount of work. So it's really about showing people that there is an abundance of work available, and a lot of different models for how you can make that work. And yeah, it's been really interesting to get to talk to a whole lot of people who are making it work.
Yeah, I mentioned my son, when he graduated, he wanted to come home and write a book before he got into the workforce, and I think it took him about 6 months. And I remember when I read it, and then when it finally got published, I mean, he chopped a bunch of chapters out and things like that, and it was interesting. I mean, it was a great concept. I'm not going to say anything he wouldn't tell you. He kind of wrote it for himself, and so a lot of big words. It was actually, some people struggled. I have a family member who's a voracious reader, and she struggled through it. But it was a really interesting premise. And ultimately, actually, some of the things he talked about in the book ended up becoming true. Not that he was predicting anything. It's just kind of the way technology went. But he's made his living, to your point, writing blogs, writing video scripts, writing articles for various publications. And I mean, that's how he has really survived for the most part, 12 years since he's been out of school.
Yeah.
And doing that. There's always opportunities. One of the things, though, I saw, we're going to kind of get off on content for a quick second, is there was a point in time that I noticed that people were looking for content writers, but literally paying them pennies on the word kind of thing. And so I always wondered how people could make a living if they're looking for a 300-word blog and they want to pay you $10 for it.
Well, you can write a lot of those if you want to. Wouldn't recommend it. Although that is kind of how I got started. I was writing nutrition articles for $30 a pop, and I was trying to do 3 or 4 a day. And, you can do that for a few months before you fall off a cliff. But it's, I think about learning what the value to the client is. If you understand, okay, this blog post is going to generate them this many leads and that many sales, and that many sales is going to mean this much revenue and that much profit, then you can sort of start to reverse engineer what the value is of your work. And that does take being willing to have those conversations with clients, being able to say, okay, so working backwards, what's the point of this piece of content? What's it trying to sell? If it's trying to sell a product, or if it's trying to educate people, like what's the lifetime value of a customer to you? What does it mean for you to sell a product? What kind of ascension offers do you have? You sort of need to think about the business in a more holistic sense than just, I'm here to write a piece of content about X. Because it's never just really the piece of content. They're doing that for a reason. They want it to pay off in some way. And so I think you can become a lot more confident about charging more when you understand the role of what you're delivering.
That's a great point. We as I'll include you in the we this time. We struggle with fees and the value that clients get, because a lot of times I was like, you're going to charge me what per hour? I said and so my argument is it's not the cost of the hours, the fact that you're getting, 25 plus years of experience jam packed in that hour. And so every client I've worked on, everything I've ever done, in that 60 minutes, you're getting that versus, paying $20 to somebody who you think can do the same thing, but they don't have the experience, the background. And so obviously you, in your time as a ghostwriter and building and, writing content for $30 an hour and building that up, I mean, you're bringing a wealth of experience and a process that really streamlines how to get from point A to point Z very efficiently. We are coming to an end. So I have a couple last questions. What inspires you? What gets you out of bed in the morning?
Oh, I mean, what gets me out of bed in the morning is my dog, unfortunately. He's very enthusiastic early in the morning. What inspires me is, I think, watching other people step into who they really want to be, and I think writing is just such a powerful way to make that happen and to show people what's possible. I really, I am very inspired by other people's creativity. I'm very inspired by nature. I read a lot, and, I try to balance my work with plenty of time, with my family and with loved ones, because I think there is a lot of inspiration that comes from the small things in life. And so I try to be present enough to notice those, because it gives me a lot of momentum.
I love that. So some parting words on your part. What if you could pick 2 or 3, 4, whatever you want to give, kind of tips and tricks and some advice to all those would-be authors out there?
First thing is to think about who your reader is and what they want from this book. I think that is most often missed for a lot of authors. You sort of start with an idea that you are interested in, but often it gets stuck somewhere between you and the page because it's not clearly defined enough for a reader. And the process of sort of trying to put that down highlights that it needs more thought. So understanding who your reader is and what they want from you, sort of, as you would do for any kind of marketing campaign, is going to help you clarify that idea a lot. And once you have that idea, put some notes on the page. Don't start with a blank page. It's so hard, to start with nothing. And so even if you start out by writing about what you had for breakfast, or, what the weather's doing this morning, just give yourself a few minutes to just blather along for a little bit, because eventually the words will come and you'll sort of start to get focused on what you're actually doing and what you want to write about. But, cut yourself a break, because nobody starts with the perfect sentence. It doesn't come out right the first time for anybody. So let yourself kind of come around to it as the ideas get stronger. I think the other thing would be, don't hold yourself to anybody else's writing rules. There's so much material out there about this and that person's writing routine, and you have to write every day and you have to do this and that. And it's just not true. It's going to be how you want to do it. And you can try out those routines, try them on, see if they fit you. And if they don't, then try something else. There's no one right way to do this. And it's very much a practice of figuring out what works for you and then sticking to it for as long as it works for you, and it might change, and that's okay.
This is, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation, educational. If you could see my pages, I've written all sorts of notes. I am going to go buy your book when we're done with this conversation, and I assume I can get it on Amazon.
Yes, you can.
Of course. So why don't we tell the audience how they can reach you, your contact information, all that good stuff.
So the best place to reach me is through my website, which is lauraiswriting.com. I also have a daily newsletter where I write about writing and all of this stuff that we've been talking about today. So that's lauraiswriting.com/the-draft. And that's Monday to Friday. I write every day. So that's a good way to kind of keep up with what I've been thinking about and working on. You can email me at laura.gale@lauraiswriting.com. I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, it's great. I got your flyer here, and I'm looking at all of your contact information. I actually signed up for something on your website today, some kind of a guidebook, I think it was, if I remember, and
Great.
Signed up to participate. You've got me hooked. You've got me inspired. I'm going to come out and start writing again. I'm going to get this book done. Damn it.
Fantastic. This year. Try for this year.
Yeah. It's a mission now. It's a mission. I'm going to just pick one and get it done instead of worrying about the three that are in all various stages. Yeah. So again, thank you so much. This has been so inspirational and insightful, because I know a lot of people that talk about it. I mean, people have had conversations about it all the time, and everybody just struggles with the same thing as how do they get started, but more importantly, not even getting started, is how do they continue?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, Thank you so much, Angelo. It's been really lovely, and I'll look forward to chatting again.
All right. Well, take care. Laura, thank you so much. I really appreciated it. And wow. You listeners just got an education, extremely valuable education in ghostwriting and books and promotions and marketing. This was, I can't even tell you how excited I am about this episode. It's, for me, it's personal. And again, I got an education, so I hopefully you did as well. My company, the Ponzi Group, provides consulting, interim, and fractional marketing and leadership services with a focus on the strategic and analytical side of marketing. We take a holistic approach to driving business growth. Consider us your marketing architects. We use research to gather the necessary insights from your customers, prospects, the competition, and the marketplace to develop fact-based approaches to building effective and efficient growth plans. And, much like a general contractor, we partner with internal teams or carefully selected vetted individuals and organizations to execute the strategies and plans, as well as provide oversight and management to ensure we stay on brand and plan. To learn more about our services, visit theponzigroup.com. Thank you again for joining me here at the cafe. And if you are a subscriber, thank you very much. And please let others know about this show and the great content, like frankly, you just heard today. You can go to thebusinessgrowthcafe.com. You can go to iTunes, Google, Spotify, Pandora, Amazon. Any place you can listen to podcasts, you can listen to this show. And I want to thank you for doing so. Join me here next week at the Business Growth Cafe.
Thank you for listening to today's discussion at the Business Growth Cafe with your host, Angelo Ponzi. Take a moment to subscribe to this podcast and visit our website at www.businessgrowthcafe.com. Read Angelo Ponzi's blogs at www.theponzigroup.com.